Commander Dax stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, staring at the view screen. In front of him, floating quietly in the vastness of space, was the enemy fleet. He scoffed under his breath. The ships before him were so small, so insignificant. They barely seemed capable of space travel, let alone posing a threat to the might of his ship. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Sirahan, stood beside him, a look of disbelief on her face. Is this it? A handful of ships. They don't even look like they belong in space. We could destroy them with a single shot. Dax crossed his arms over his chest and leaned forward slightly, eyes never leaving the screen. The enemy fleet was barely more than a dozen ships, scrappy, mismatched, and clearly unworthy of the Vanguard's attention. Each ship was small, barely the size of a civilian transport vessel, with no noticeable weapons or defense systems. It was laughable. They must be a scout group, Dax. Sarah continued, her voice dripping with disdain. They're probably trying to see what they can get away with. Should we waste any more time on them? Commander Dax shook his head slowly, keeping his gaze fixed on the tiny fleet. There was something about them that didn't sit right with him, though he couldn't put his finger on it. The ships were too, well, out of place. Not yet, Dax said, his voice low. I want to know who's behind this. If it's a human fleet, it could be more than a simple scouting mission. Let's see what they do. The crew aboard the Vanguard was well trained. They had faced countless threats from alien races across the galaxy, and the Alliance military knew how to handle any adversary that dared to challenge them. But these ships, they were an anomaly. They were so small, so primitive, that they didn't seem worth the time. And yet, there was an instinctive unease in Dax's chest that told him to be cautious. This couldn't just be a random encounter. Sarah stepped back from the console, her eyes still fixed on the fleet. If you say so, Commander. But this is a waste of time. We could be preparing for a real threat. Dax didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued to study the ships on the screen. From the data they had collected so far, the ships were indeed human-made. That was something they hadn't expected. Humans had never been known to build ships capable of intergalactic travel, let alone a fleet like this. How had they managed it? All right, Dax said after a long pause. We'll keep our distance for now, but let's monitor their movements closely. I want to know who sent them and why they're out here. A strange encounter. The hours dragged on as the Vanguard followed the small fleet, keeping a safe distance. As the tiny ships drifted through space, there was still no sign of any real threat. No aggressive moves, no weapons being activated. But Commander Dax's gut told him to wait. Something was coming. Commander, the fleet is changing course, Sarah said, her voice tense. They're heading toward a nearby asteroid belt. What should we do? Dax paused, considering the options. Stay close, but don't get too near. We don't want to risk giving ourselves away just yet. Let them do whatever they're doing. The fleet of small ships glided towards the asteroid belt, where the Vanguard sensors began to pick up strange energy readings. The ships seemed to be maneuvering through the debris field with precision, almost as if they had done this before. It was a skill the humans hadn't been known for. They were resourceful, yes, but this was unexpected. The tension builds. Dax ordered his crew to keep their distance, but the sense of unease that had been building within him only grew stronger. There was something off about this situation, something that didn't make sense. How could these tiny ships, these primitive-looking vessels, navigate through one of the galaxy's most dangerous asteroid belts with such ease? And then it happened. Without warning, one of the ships in the tiny fleet suddenly emitted a brilliant flash of light. It was a strange pulse, like a beacon, but unlike any signal Dax had ever seen. The flash lit up the surrounding space, temporarily blinding the Vanguard sensors. Status report. Dax barked, his voice sharp. We've lost sight of the fleet, Sarah replied quickly, her fingers flying over her console. Their energy readings are fluctuating, Commander. Something is going on. Dax's eyes narrowed. Bring them back. I want full tracking on that fleet. The crew scrambled, attempting to regain the fleet's location. And then, a moment later, the screens blinked to life once more, but with a shocking sight. The tiny fleet had transformed. The ships had somehow shifted, their structures glowing with unfamiliar energy. They were now emitting an aura of power that Dax had never expected to see from such small ships. "Wait," Sarah said, her voice tinged with disbelief. That can't be right. These ships weren't capable of anything like this. We ran scans before. They had no weapon systems. Nothing like this. Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Dax asked, his voice tense. Sarah stared at the screen, her mouth open in shock. "Commander, those ships, they've somehow integrated advanced technology. They've evolved." Dax's heart raced. This was not what he had expected. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the impossible. He had dismissed these ships so easily, thinking they were harmless. But now, they were far more than they appeared. These tiny ships weren't just scout vessels. They were something far greater. "Full alert," Dax ordered, his tone urgent. "Activate all defenses. We're about to find out just what these ships can do." A new threat emerges. The fleet began to move again, but now it was clear they weren't just floating aimlessly. They were on a direct course for the Vanguard. The once laughable ships had become something terrifying. Their newfound energy signatures had elevated them into a different class of threat. Dax's thoughts raced. How could humans have done this? How had they built such a powerful fleet without anyone knowing? What was the true purpose of these ships? As the tiny fleet advanced, Commander Dax felt his pulse quicken. He had underestimated them. And now he would have to face the consequences of that mistake. What had once seemed like an easy victory was about to become a fight for survival. The standoff. The tiny fleet approached with unrelenting precision. As Commander Dax watched, his mind raced with questions. How had these seemingly weak vessels turned into such a formidable threat? They were so small, barely visible against the vastness of space, but the energy readings were undeniable. Something was changing. The once primitive ships now appeared to be powered by unknown technology, technology that humans should not have possessed. "Commander, they're closing in," Sarah reported, her voice steady but filled with the same concern that Dax had. "They're not responding to our hails. It's almost as if they don't even hear us." Dax clenched his fists. This was not how things were supposed to go. A fleet this small should have been nothing. They should have been easy prey for the Vanguard's advanced weaponry. But the situation was spiraling out of control, and Dax couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was unfolding before them. "Bring up all data on the fleet's past movements," Dax commanded. "We need to understand who's behind this. And I want a full scan of their ships. Every inch. This can't just be some lucky fluke." The breakthrough. The crew of the Vanguard worked quickly, trying to gather as much information as they could on the unknown fleet. As the minutes ticked by, the tension on the bridge became palpable. Everyone knew that if this went wrong, they could be facing an enemy they were completely unprepared for. Suddenly, a breakthrough came. The science officer, Dr. Anson, turned toward Dax, his face pale. "Commander, we've analyzed the energy patterns. The ships, they've been enhanced. We're picking up traces of human-made technology, mixed with something alien, something we've never seen before." Dax's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, alien?" Dr. Anson hesitated, looking down at his screen, his fingers trembling. "I mean, it's not human. But the source is unmistakably familiar. It's as if they've merged human technology with something far beyond our understanding." Dax's mind raced. This was more than just a fleet of ships. These weren't just human-made vessels that had been advanced by a different race. They had somehow combined human ingenuity with alien power. But why? How? And who had done it? An unexpected message. As Dax pondered the impossible situation, the screen suddenly flickered. A message, encrypted but unmistakably human, appeared on the bridge's main screen. Dax leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. It was a transmission from one of the ships in the fleet. The message was simple, but it sent a chill down Dax's spine. "We are the last of the human race. You've been warned." There was a long pause as the meaning of the message sank in. "The last of the human race," Sarah repeated, her voice tight with confusion. "What does that mean? Are they survivors of something? What are they trying to tell us?" Dax stared at the message, the weight of its words settling like a heavy stone on his chest. The question that had been lingering in his mind now seemed to have an answer. These ships, these people, they weren't just from some unknown corner of space. They were humans. But why would humanity send such a small, obscure fleet? And why had it been enhanced with alien technology? "Are they hostile?" Sarah asked, breaking Dax out of his thoughts. Dax hesitated. The fear that had been creeping up inside him was slowly being replaced by a sense of urgency. "I don't know, but we need to be ready for anything." A glimpse of the unknown. The fleet of ships continued its steady approach toward the Vanguard, but there was no immediate threat. No weapons were being activated, no overt signs of aggression. Yet Dax couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to be thrust into something much larger than any of them could possibly imagine. "Have we been able to identify their command structure?" Dax asked, trying to focus on something practical. Dr. Anson looked at his screen, his brow furrowed. "Not entirely, Commander. But there's something strange. It's like the fleet is being controlled remotely, almost as if the ships themselves are being guided by an outside force." Dax turned sharply to face Dr. Anson. "What do you mean by outside force?" The scientist took a deep breath. "I mean, it's almost as though the ships are responding to a signal from somewhere, like they're not fully autonomous. It's hard to explain." Dax clenched his jaw, trying to process the information. "So there's someone, or something, pulling the strings." "Yes," Dr. Anson confirmed. "But who or what it is, I can't say. Not yet." The fleet's next move. The fleet's movements remained precise, yet eerily calm. It seemed as though the ships had one singular purpose, and no one on the Vanguard could quite understand what it was. No one had ever heard of a fleet like this before. No one had ever seen a force like this before. These humans, whoever they were, had somehow unlocked a power that went far beyond the realm of normal technology. Suddenly, one of the ships broke off from the fleet, heading straight toward the Vanguard. "Incoming," Sarah shouted, her voice sharp with alarm. "They're targeting us." Dax's heart raced as the ship came closer, its engines glowing with strange, pulsating energy. The Vanguard's weapon systems came online, but Dax hesitated. This was no ordinary attack. This ship wasn't firing weapons. Instead, it was getting closer, closer until it was within firing range. Yet it still hadn't launched any sort of offensive. "Hold fire," Dax ordered, his voice firm. "I want to know what they're doing first." The ship was now dangerously close, and just when Dax thought it might be too late, the vessel veered off at the last moment, passing by the Vanguard without incident. But it wasn't over. The fleet, once seemingly docile, had just shown its true nature. "We've been played," Dax muttered under his breath. The mysterious signal. As the Vanguard drifted silently in the shadow of the asteroid belt, the tension on the bridge was unbearable. Commander Dax's mind was racing. The tiny fleet that had once seemed like a joke was now a terrifying mystery. The ship's new energy signatures, the cryptic message about being the last of the human race, and the strange behaviors they had exhibited, all of it added up to something much bigger than he could have imagined. "Commander," Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts. "We've detected another signal coming from the fleet. It's different this time." Dax snapped to attention, his mind instantly shifting back to the mission. "Different how?" "It's more structured, almost like a broadcast. It's coming from the lead ship," Sarah explained, her fingers working quickly at the console. "We've managed to decode part of it." Dax's stomach tightened. "Play it." Sarah hit a few keys, and the message came through. The sound was distorted, but there was no mistaking the words. "We were lost, betrayed, but humanity will rise again. The fleet is a warning. Do not repeat our mistakes. We will return to take what's ours." The words hung in the air like a dark omen. Dax's mind spun as the weight of their meaning settled on him. These weren't just survivors of a lost human civilization. They were something far more dangerous. This fleet wasn't a random group of ships. They were a declaration. "They've come back to reclaim something," Sarah muttered, shaking her head in disbelief. "But what? What are they coming for?" Dax's voice was low and full of determination. "We're about to find out." The past revealed. As the Vanguard continued to monitor the fleet, Dax ordered his crew to dig deeper into their records. They needed answers. Fast. Dr. Anson's voice suddenly broke the silence. "Commander, we found something. It's a recorded history from their ships. It's fragmented, but I think we can piece it together." Dax turned to the science officer. "Play it. I need to know what happened." The screen flickered and then displayed an old, grainy video. The images were barely recognizable, but Dax could make out the familiar shape of human spacecraft. However, something was terribly wrong. The ships were old, decrepit, and their crew looked different. A voice came through the recording, distorted but clear enough to understand. "We were warned. The alien alliance told us to stay away, to not venture too far into the void. But we were arrogant. We thought we could control everything. We thought we could harness the power of the unknown. And we paid the price." The video showed humans working in what looked like a dark, abandoned lab. There were strange markings on the walls, symbols Dax didn't recognize. The crew appeared to be tampering with alien technology that was far beyond their understanding. "We awoke something ancient. It tore our ships apart, our world, our people. And now we have no choice. We must return, or we will be wiped from existence." The video cut off abruptly, and Dax was left staring at the screen, feeling the chill of what he had just witnessed. These humans had made a deadly mistake. They had reached too far, entering something far beyond their comprehension. And now, whatever was left of them was coming back to finish what they had started. A new threat emerges. Dax's heart raced. He had suspected it, but hearing it from the humans themselves confirmed it. These were not just survivors. These were the last remnants of a human race that had gone too far, too fast, and had awakened something they couldn't control. Whatever power they had uncovered had changed them. They weren't the same people they once were. The small fleet before them was a warning, but it was also a threat. "Commander, the fleet is moving again," Sarah said, her voice tense. "They're headed straight for the coordinates we detected earlier, the site of an ancient human colony. It's uninhabited now, but if they're targeting it..." Dax interrupted her, his voice commanding. "Prepare for battle. We can't let them reach that colony. If they want to reclaim something, we can't let them do it unchecked." The calm before the storm. As the Vanguard moved closer to the coordinates, Dax's mind raced with questions. What exactly were these humans coming for? What had been lost all those years ago? And why were they returning now, with such a deadly purpose? But as the fleet moved toward the abandoned colony, there was a strange calm that washed over the crew. The fleet of tiny ships, once so dangerous, now seemed almost peaceful. They floated through the stars with a quiet determination, almost as if they were waiting for something. A rendezvous. A confrontation. Dax knew it was coming. "All hands, prepare for a full confrontation," Dax ordered, his voice steady but filled with a grim resolve. "Whatever they want, we will not let them take it. We are humanity's last line of defense." The confrontation begins. The fleet came to a halt just outside the old colony's borders. Dax could see the ships now, hovering silently. There was no sign of movement, no sign of weapons charging. But the air on the bridge was thick with tension. Suddenly, a loud crackling noise filled the bridge as one of the ships sent a transmission. It was a simple message, but it shook Dax to his core. "We have arrived. The time for reckoning has come. Prepare yourselves." The message was clear. They weren't just here to reclaim something. They were here for a battle. They were here for war. Dax's fingers hovered over the controls, his heart pounding in his chest. He was ready for this. But was his crew? Were they truly ready to face this new, terrifying version of humanity? A humanity that had made a deadly mistake in the past and was now determined to fix it, no matter the cost. The battle was about to begin, and it would change everything. The first strike. The stillness on the bridge of the Vanguard was suddenly shattered by the piercing sound of alarms. The fleet of tiny ships, which had previously hovered in silence, now surged forward with terrifying speed. "Brace for impact," Dax shouted, gripping the armrests of his command chair. "All hands, ready the defense systems." As the words left his mouth, the first barrage of energy blasts erupted from the small fleet. The sheer power behind them was unlike anything the Vanguard had faced before. The Vanguard rocked violently as shields flared brightly in an attempt to absorb the incoming blasts. "Shields are holding," Sarah, the tactical officer, reported, though her voice was strained. "But the enemy ships are showing no signs of stopping." Dax's mind raced. What kind of weaponry were they dealing with? The ships were tiny, seemingly outdated, but their firepower was devastating. It didn't make sense. Why aren't they retreating? Dax muttered under his breath, almost to himself. The ships weren't interested in victory. They were simply charging headfirst into a battle they knew they couldn't win. But why? The realization hit him like a lightning strike. These weren't just ships. They were suicidal, driven by something deeper, something more urgent than mere conquest. "Captain, the enemy ships are there, self-destructing," Sarah shouted, eyes wide in horror. Dax looked at the screens in disbelief. The tiny fleet, one by one, was initiating a countdown. The last remnant of humanity, sacrificing everything to ensure their final victory. A dire strategy. "Move us out of the blast zone," Dax barked, gripping the armrests of his chair. But even as he spoke, he knew they couldn't escape it all. The blast radius was too wide, and the enemy ships were already too close. Explosions erupted around the Vanguard as multiple ships detonated in a cascade of bright lights. The shockwave rocked the Vanguard, and Dax's stomach lurched as the entire ship shook violently. "Status report," Dax ordered through gritted teeth. "We've taken heavy damage, Commander," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Hull integrity is at 60%. Shields are holding for now. But if we take another hit, we can't afford another hit. Power up our weapons," Dax interrupted, his voice tight with urgency. If they want to fight, they're going to get one. But something gnawed at him. The fact that the enemy wasn't interested in victory in the traditional sense. They were willing to die for their cause. Their desperation was palpable, and Dax couldn't help but wonder what had driven them to such extremes. What was it that they were fighting for? And why had they targeted humanity's last hope? The truth behind the madness. While the crew scrambled to maintain their defenses, Dax found himself staring at the screen, watching as the remaining ships in the tiny fleet continued their suicidal march toward the Vanguard. He could feel the tension in the air, a growing weight that threatened to suffocate him. The desire to win had been replaced by the drive to end the conflict at any cost. A sudden thought jolted him upright. It was the words from the last transmission they had intercepted from that recorded message. "The fleet is a warning. Do not repeat our mistakes. We will return to take what's ours." "What's ours?" Dax repeated softly under his breath. He was no longer just facing a battle for survival. He was facing a deeper, more existential question. What had these people lost that they were willing to destroy everything to reclaim? A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Commander, we've decrypted more of their message," Dr. Anson reported urgently. It's a history, a warning. They did something terrible. They created something dangerous. And now, it's coming for us." Dax's mind raced. He already suspected as much. These humans had tampered with something they didn't understand. Something ancient, something powerful. And now, the consequences were beginning to unfold. "Play it," Dax ordered. A legacy of horror. The screen flashed once more, and a new recording appeared. This time, it was clearer, the sound sharper. The footage depicted humans working in what seemed to be a dark, cavernous space. In the center of the room stood an alien artifact, an object that Dax recognized from the strange markings on their ships. It pulsed with an eerie light, an otherworldly glow that seemed to hum with power. The voice from the recording came through, once again filled with regret and desperation. "We thought we could control it. The artifact. The power it offered. We thought we could use it to reshape the future, but we were wrong. It wasn't a tool. It was a curse. And now, we've unleashed it." The video continued to show chaotic scenes of the human colony being destroyed, cities reduced to rubble, and the skies darkened by swirling, unnatural storms. But the worst was yet to come. The screen cut to an image of a monstrous, otherworldly entity, vast, dark, and twisted beyond recognition. It was something not of this universe, something beyond the comprehension of even the advanced humans. "It's coming for us. It's coming for everything. We are the last remnants of a broken world. The fleet, it's our last chance to stop it. If we can't, then we are doomed. And so is the rest of humanity." The screen flickered off, leaving Dax and the crew of the Vanguard in stunned silence. The return of the enemy. The crew didn't have much time to process the horrifying truth. The remaining ships of the fleet continued their relentless assault, not caring about their own survival. They had one goal: to destroy the Vanguard before it could stop them from completing their mission. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the lead ship," Sarah reported urgently. "It's direct. No encryption." Dax nodded. "Put it through." The voice on the other end was cold, distant, but unmistakably human. "We will reclaim what is ours, Commander. It was never meant to be. You should not have survived. The artifact is ours, and it will be ours again, no matter the cost." The transmission cut off, and the battle raged on. A race against time. Dax's mind was spinning. The artifact. It wasn't just a relic. It was a weapon. A power beyond anything humanity had ever known. If the enemy succeeded in unleashing it once more, it could spell the end of everything. But how could he stop them? How could he possibly fight something that humanity had unknowingly created? "We need to get to the artifact," Dax said, his voice low and determined. "We need to stop them before it's too late." But as the fleet of ships continued its assault, Dax couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The artifact wasn't just a weapon. It was a force that could change the very fabric of reality itself. And the countdown was ticking. A deadly countdown. The battle was far from over. As the remnants of the tiny fleet continued their furious assault on the Vanguard, the crew was faced with an even greater threat. Time was running out. Commander Dax stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield before him. Each pulse of energy from the enemy fleet sent shockwaves through his ship, but it wasn't just the enemy they had to worry about anymore. "We need to stop them from reaching the artifact," Dax shouted, voice cutting through the noise. "That's their endgame. If they unlock its full power, humanity is finished." Sarah finished for him, her face grim as she stared at the now damaged ships closing in around them. It was clear now. The fleet's suicidal charge was a desperate attempt to secure the artifact, to harness its devastating power once more. But no one knew what horrors it could unleash if allowed to fall into the wrong hands. And the enemy had already proven that they were willing to destroy everything to reclaim it. The dark power. "Commander, we've analyzed more of their recordings," Dr. Anson reported, breathless as he worked at the console. The artifact. It's not just a weapon. It's an ancient power, something that even the most advanced civilizations feared. When activated, it can bend the laws of space and time. Dax's heart sank. The implications were staggering. The artifact wasn't just a tool of destruction. It was a reality-warping device, capable of shifting entire realities and potentially erasing human existence. If these humans had unlocked its full potential once before, there was no telling what kind of destruction they could wreak the second time around. We're dealing with something far beyond our understanding, Dr. Anson added. We don't know what it could do if it's reactivated. But Dax already knew one thing. If the fleet succeeded in reaching that artifact, there was no turning back. A dire decision. Can we stop them? Dax asked, turning to his crew. We need to take out their lid ship. It's the key to everything. Sarah responded, her voice determined, yet tinged with fear. If we can disable it, maybe we can disrupt their coordinated attack and buy ourselves enough time to prevent them from activating the artifact. Dax nodded, his decision made. All power to the weapons. Fire at will. Target their lid ship. The Vanguard surged forward, its weapons charging with energy. Every shot fired sent a blast of light through the dark void of space, but the enemy fleet wasn't going down without a fight. The tiny ships darted through the shadows, their agile movements designed to confuse and overwhelm. Yet Dax's ship was far stronger, and its weapons were more precise. Each shot found its mark, taking down one of the smaller enemy ships at a time. But the lead ship, the one at the center of it all, was still intact. Dax's mind raced. How could they stop it before it reached the artifact? Every second counted. The unseen enemy. As Dax ordered another barrage of fire at the lead ship, a strange sensation washed over him. The ship had been emitting unusual energy pulses, pulses that didn't match any known weapon systems. It was as if the enemy was preparing something more powerful than the explosions they were currently exchanging. Commander, Sarah called out, her voice tight with worry. They're activating a secondary system. It's not like anything we've ever seen before. Before she could finish, a shockwave reverberated through the Vanguard, throwing everyone off balance. The lights flickered, and the ship groaned as its systems struggled to stabilize. Status report, Dax demanded, gripping the console in front of him. We've lost control of some of our systems, Sarah shouted, her fingers flying across the keys. Power surge detected in the lid ship. It's like they're opening a portal. Dax's blood ran cold. The lead ship wasn't just trying to fire back. It was opening a rift, a doorway to another dimension, or worse, another time. Shut it down. Now, Dax ordered. But it was too late. The rift grew larger, pulling in everything in its path. The Vanguard struggled to pull away, but the gravitational pull of the rift was too strong. In an instant, the entire battlefield was transformed. The stars seemed to twist and distort as the rift threatened to consume them all. The final battle. Commander, we're being pulled into it, Sarah screamed, panic in her voice. Dax's mind raced, but he refused to let the fear take hold. They were in uncharted territory now, fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity itself. We need to shut down that rift. Dax barked as his eyes darted across the screen. Weapons, full power. We're going to destroy the lid ship. It's the only way to stop this. But before he could give the order, another explosion rocked the Vanguard. This time, it came from inside the ship. Sparks flew as alarms blared, and Dax realized with horror that the rift was interfering with their own systems. They couldn't maintain control. Get us away from the rift, Dax shouted, heart pounding. Full thrust, Sarah. Full thrust, now. The Vanguard lurched forward, but the rift's pull was overwhelming. They were being dragged toward the unknown. On the view screen, the lead ship loomed closer and closer. It was glowing with energy, its engines overloading, its weapons charging for one final assault. Dax knew they had only one shot to stop it. If they didn't succeed, there would be no more humanity, no more Earth. Everything they knew and loved would be lost forever. "Prepare to fire," Dax muttered, his fingers tight on the controls. All or nothing. The ultimate sacrifice. The rift grew wider, its edges crackling with destructive energy. The battle had become a desperate last stand, and Dax knew they were running out of time. In one final, terrifying moment, the lead ship fired a massive blast, a burst of energy that lit up the stars and tore through the darkness. The shot was aimed directly at the Vanguard, but Dax was ready. He had already given the order to fire on the lead ship. As the two ships exchanged blasts, there was a blinding explosion, a shockwave that rocked both ships and caused everything to blur into chaos. The Vanguard was hit, but not before a final, powerful shot from their weapons hit the lead ship directly in its vulnerable core. The rift collapsed in on itself, swallowing the enemy fleet, the lead ship, and the artifact's energy. But in that moment, Dax knew that they had paid a terrible price. They had won, yet the consequences of their victory were still unknown. Shattered victory. The aftermath of the explosion left the Vanguard in a state of disarray. The rift had collapsed, but the shockwave from the blast had sent them spiraling out of control. Emergency lights flickered, and alarms blared as the crew struggled to regain control of the ship. Dax could barely keep himself upright as the deck trembled beneath him. "Status report," he demanded, his voice trained but commanding. Sarah, her face pale but determined, looked up from her console. "We've lost half our systems, Commander. Power grids are unstable. The engines—" She paused, her eyes widening as she processed the data. "The engines are still functional, but we've been thrown off course. We're drifting." Dax clenched his fists. They had survived the rift, but barely. He couldn't afford to let his crew fall apart now, not when they were so close to uncovering the truth. "Can we repair the ship?" Dax asked, trying to keep the edge of panic from his voice. "It'll take time," Sarah replied. "We need to stabilize the systems first." "But there's something else, Commander." She hesitated. "We're not alone." An unseen presence. Dax turned to face Sarah, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What do you mean, not alone?" "There's a signal coming through our comms," she explained, her fingers typing furiously at the console. "It's faint, almost like a distress signal, but—" She trailed off as the signal grew stronger. "Put it on screen," Dax ordered, his heart rate spiking as he waited. The screen flickered, then cleared. The image that appeared was one that Dax hadn't expected. Another ship. But this one was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was ancient, battered, and covered in strange, glowing symbols. The ship's exterior was pockmarked and scarred, as if it had been traveling through space for centuries. Dax's mind raced as he recognized the symbols. They were the same as those found on the artifact. But how could this ship have survived the rift? Before Dax could say anything, the ship's transmission came through loud and clear, the voice on the other end cold and unfamiliar. "This is the last warning. Leave now or face the consequences." The message was chilling. There was no doubt in Dax's mind that the enemy fleet had left something behind. Something far worse than they had anticipated. The dark truth. Who are they?" Dax murmured, his gaze fixed on the unknown ship. There was no mistake. It was human, but twisted by time. This ship had been out there for far too long. And its crew, they were likely the ones who had originally unleashed the artifact's dark power. "Not just any humans," Dr. Anson interjected, his voice grave. "Those symbols, they're not from the original fleet. This ship, it's older. It must be part of the same civilization, one that traveled across time and space." Dax's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The artifact, the strange ships, the powerful rift. It was all part of a much larger puzzle. The humans who had tried to control the artifact had been the architects of their own destruction. And now, the consequences of their meddling were returning with a vengeance. "We are the ones who have been forgotten," the voice from the ship continued, its tone filled with bitterness. "You will not undo what has been done. The artifact belongs to us now, and you will pay for your interference." Dax could feel the weight of their words pressing down on him. The artifact wasn't just an object. It was the key to something far greater, a power so immense that even the humans who had originally used it were afraid of its true potential. "We need to stop them," Dax said, more to himself than anyone else. "We can't let them unleash what they've brought back with them." The hunt for the artifact. As the transmission ended, the image of the ancient ship faded into the distance. The Vanguard was still drifting, but now they had a new objective: find the artifact before the mysterious crew of the ancient ship could claim it. "Sarah, can we locate the artifact?" Dax asked, his voice steady but urgent. "I'll try, but the system is still unstable," Sarah responded. "We'll need to triangulate the coordinates from the last known location of the enemy fleet and the rift. But it's going to take time." Dax nodded. They had no time to waste. The artifact had already caused too much damage, and if the ancient crew succeeded in taking control of it, humanity would be facing an even greater threat than before. "Dr. Anson, I need everything you can give me on that ship. What do we know about them?" Dax asked, his eyes narrowing. "Their ship is ancient," Anson replied, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's not just old. It's been through the rift. It's been altered by the same power that corrupted the First Fleet. This crew, they may no longer be human in the traditional sense. Their minds, their bodies, they've been warped by the artifact's power." "Then we're not just fighting for survival," Dax muttered, his hands gripping the console. "We're fighting for humanity's future. If we don't stop them, the artifact will destroy everything." The descent into madness. As the crew of the Vanguard prepared to follow the trail left by the ancient ship, Dax couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into a trap. The more they learned about the artifact, the more it seemed like a force beyond anything they could comprehend. And the ancient crew, corrupted by its power, would stop at nothing to reclaim it. "Commander," Sarah said, her voice quiet but tense, "we've found the coordinates. The ship is heading to an unknown location in deep space, far from any known systems." "Set course," Dax ordered without hesitation. "We're going after them." But even as the ship powered up its engines, Dax couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. The artifact had already twisted reality once, and now it was pulling everything toward an unknown and dangerous future. Could they stop it in time? The stars outside the Vanguard seemed to blur as they jumped to warp speed, but Dax's mind was focused on one thing: stopping the ancient crew from unleashing the artifact's full power, no matter the cost. Shattered victory. The aftermath of the explosion left the Vanguard in a state of disarray. The rift had collapsed, but the shockwave from the blast had sent them spiraling out of control. Emergency lights flickered, and alarms blared as the crew struggled to regain control of the ship. Dax could barely keep himself upright as the deck trembled beneath him. "Status report," he demanded, his voice trained but commanding. Sarah, her face pale but determined, looked up from her console. "We've lost half our systems, Commander. Power grids are unstable. The engines..." She paused, her eyes widening as she processed the data. "The engines are still functional, but we've been thrown off course. We're drifting." Dax clenched his fists. They had survived the rift, but barely. He couldn't afford to let his crew fall apart now, not when they were so close to uncovering the truth. "Can we repair the ship?" Dax asked, trying to keep the edge of panic from his voice. "It'll take time," Sarah replied. "We need to stabilize the systems first. But there's something else, Commander." She hesitated. "We're not alone." An unseen presence. Dax turned to face Sarah, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What do you mean, not alone?" "There's a signal coming through our comms," she explained, her fingers typing furiously at the console. It's faint, almost like a distress signal, but she trailed off as the signal grew stronger. "Put it on screen," Dax ordered, his heart rate spiking as he waited. The screen flickered, then cleared. The image that appeared was one that Dax hadn't expected. Another ship. But this one was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was ancient, battered, and covered in strange, glowing symbols. The ship's exterior was pockmarked and scarred, as if it had been traveling through space for centuries. Dax's mind raced as he recognized the symbols. They were the same as those found on the artifact. But how could this ship have survived the rift? Before Dax could say anything, the ship's transmission came through loud and clear, the voice on the other end cold and unfamiliar. "This is the last warning. Leave now or face the consequences." The message was chilling. There was no doubt in Dax's mind that the enemy fleet had left something behind. Something far worse than they had anticipated. The dark truth. Who are they? Dax murmured, his gaze fixed on the unknown ship. There was no mistake. It was human, but twisted by time. This ship had been out there for far too long. And its crew, they were likely the ones who had originally unleashed the artifact's dark power. "Not just any humans," Dr. Anson interjected, his voice grave. "Those symbols, they're not from the original fleet. This ship, it's older. It must be part of the same civilization, one that traveled across time and space." Dax's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The artifact, the strange ships, the powerful rift, it was all part of a much larger puzzle. The humans who had tried to control the artifact had been the architects of their own destruction. And now, the consequences of their meddling were returning with a vengeance. "We are the ones who have been forgotten," the voice from the ship continued, its tone filled with bitterness. "You will not undo what has been done. The artifact belongs to us now, and you will pay for your interference." Dax could feel the weight of their words pressing down on him. The artifact wasn't just an object. It was the key to something far greater, a power so immense that even the humans who had originally used it were afraid of its true potential. "We need to stop them," Dax said, more to himself than anyone else. "We can't let them unleash what they've brought back with them." The hunt for the artifact. As the transmission ended, the image of the ancient ship faded into the distance. The Vanguard was still drifting, but now they had a new objective: find the artifact before the mysterious crew of the ancient ship could claim it. "Sarah, can we locate the artifact?" Dax asked, his voice steady but urgent. "I'll try, but the system is still unstable," Sarah responded. "We'll need to triangulate the coordinates from the last known location of the enemy fleet and the rift. But it's going to take time." Dax nodded. They had no time to waste. The artifact had already caused too much damage, and if the ancient crew succeeded in taking control of it, humanity would be facing an even greater threat than before. "Dr. Anson, I need everything you can give me on that ship. What do we know about them?" Dax asked, his eyes narrowing. "Their ship is ancient," Anson replied, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's not just old. It's been through the rift. It's been altered by the same power that corrupted the First Fleet. This crew, they may no longer be human in the traditional sense. Their minds, their bodies, they'd been warped by the artifact's power." "Then we're not just fighting for survival," Dax muttered, his hands gripping the console. "We're fighting for humanity's future. If we don't stop them, the artifact will destroy everything." The descent into madness. As the crew of the Vanguard prepared to follow the trail left by the ancient ship, Dax couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into a trap. The more they learned about the artifact, the more it seemed like a force beyond anything they could comprehend. And the ancient crew, corrupted by its power, would stop at nothing to reclaim it. "Commander," Sarah said, her voice quiet but tense, "we found the coordinates. The ship is heading to an unknown location in deep space, far from any known systems." "Set course," Dax ordered without hesitation. "We're going after them." But even as the ship powered up its engines, Dax couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. The artifact had already twisted reality once, and now it was pulling everything toward an unknown and dangerous future. Could they stop it in time? The stars outside the Vanguard seemed to blur as they jumped to warp speed, but Dax's mind was focused on one thing: stopping the ancient crew from unleashing the artifact's full power, no matter the cost. The cold abyss. The Vanguard surged through the void of space, its engines straining to their limits as it followed the coordinates to the unknown location. The crew was on edge, knowing that the deeper they ventured, the closer they were to confronting a force far beyond their comprehension. Dax stood at the command deck, eyes fixed on the stars outside. The steady hum of the ship was a constant reminder that they were on borrowed time. Every second that passed meant one step closer to the final confrontation, and the weight of the decision pressing on his shoulders only grew heavier. "Commander, we're nearing the coordinates." Sarah's voice broke the silence. "There's nothing out here. It's like a dead zone." "Keep scanning." "We're close," Dax replied, though even he wasn't sure what they were heading into. The enemy ship had led them here, but to what end? Was it a trap? Or had they been drawn into a place where no one could escape? The tension on the ship was palpable as they approached what looked like an abandoned, empty expanse in space. No planets, no stars, just a cold, desolate void. The artifact's signal was stronger now, pulsing like a heartbeat, but it wasn't coming from any known source. "It's here," Dr. Anson said, stepping forward from the back of the room, eyes wide with awe. "Whatever this place is, the artifact is in the heart of it. This isn't just a random location. It's been specifically chosen, and I think we know why. The hidden sanctuary." Suddenly, the view screen flickered to life, and a massive structure appeared in the distance, hovering silently in the emptiness of space. It was unlike anything Dax had ever seen, partly organic, partly mechanical, and glowing with the same eerie symbols as the artifact. It was as if the ship itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the artifact. "Prepare for docking," Dax ordered, though the command felt futile. What could they do if the ship turned out to be a deadly trap? The Vanguard drifted closer, but before they could dock, a voice boomed through their communication system. It was the same cold, malevolent voice they had heard before. "You have come too far." Dax's heart clenched. There was no turning back now. "Prepare for anything," he muttered to his crew. "This is it." The crew tensed, but there was no more time for hesitation. The ship began to pull itself toward the mysterious structure, its pull undeniable. With a soft thud, the Vanguard docked to the unknown structure, sealing their fate. The echo chamber. Inside, the air was thick with a strange energy. The walls seemed to shimmer with an unnatural glow, and the very ground under their feet vibrated with power. They could all feel it, an oppressive ancient presence that seemed to be watching their every move. "This is it," Dax said softly, his voice barely audible. "The artifact is here." Sarah nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes were wide, scanning every corner of the room, alert for any signs of danger. "Keep your eyes peeled," Dax ordered. "We don't know what's waiting for us inside." They walked cautiously through the chamber, every step bringing them closer to the artifact, yet further into the unknown. Then, just ahead of them, in the center of the room, they saw it, the artifact, suspended in midair, surrounded by a web of glowing energy. It was more beautiful than they had imagined, and more dangerous. Its pulsating glow seemed to radiate power, and Dax felt a strange tug, like it was calling to him. "Don't touch it," Sarah shouted as Dax took a step forward, his hand instinctively reaching out. But it was too late. The moment his fingers brushed the energy, the room shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the air. The artifact flared to life, its power surging outward, and the very fabric of reality seemed to bend around them. The true master. Then, through the swirling chaos, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was humanoid, but its features were distorted, twisted by time, the very essence of the artifact itself. The crew froze, horrified as they realized who stood before them. It was the captain of the ancient ship, but no longer human in any recognizable form. The creature's eyes glowed with the same unnatural light as the artifact. Its voice was cold, hollow, and filled with an unimaginable weight. "You think you can stop us," it said. "You were foolish to come here. The artifact is mine, and now you will be its next victims." Dax's breath caught in his throat. This was the end, the very being they had feared, the one that had been warped and twisted by the artifact, stood before them, more powerful than anything they could comprehend. "We won't let you take it," Dax said, his voice a defiant growl. "This ends now." The final stand. Without warning, the creature lunged, its form shifting in the blink of an eye, more like a shadow than a being. The crew scattered as the creature's energy blasts erupted from its hands, ripping through the air. Dax barely managed to dodge one, his heart pounding in his chest. "Sarah," Dax shouted, "do we have any weapons left?" "Only the secondary systems," she replied, her voice tight with stress. "But they won't be enough against it. It's too powerful." They were running out of options. The power of the artifact had corrupted everything around them. The creature was beyond any enemy they had fought, a product of centuries of manipulation and control. "We need to destroy the artifact," Dax said urgently. "That's the only way to stop him. If we don't, this entire place will collapse, taking us with it." But how could they destroy something that held the power to warp reality itself? Every moment spent in the artifact's presence was bending their minds and bodies. It was a race against time, and Dax knew they needed a plan, and they needed it fast. The last sacrifice. "Commander," Sarah said, her voice cracking with desperation, "there's one chance, but it's going to require a sacrifice. We can overload the ship's core, create an explosion strong enough to destroy the artifact. It'll take us all down with it, but we might be able to stop it." Dax knew what that meant. It was a one-way trip. The entire crew gathered at his side, their faces determined. The enemy was closing in, but there was no choice. They couldn't let the artifact's power escape into the universe. If they didn't act now, humanity would be lost forever. "We'll do it together," Dax said, his voice steady. With the crew's help, they activated the ship's core to overload. The Vanguard shook violently as energy coursed through it, the artifact's power fighting against them every step of the way. And then, with a blinding flash, everything went silent.